very good morning, student. In this video, we shall learn about the sulci and gyri, the major sulcus and sulci and gyri, which are present on the supralateral surface, which are present on the inferior surface of cerebral hemisphere, and the sulci and gyri, which are present on the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere, we will see. But before we go to the sulci and gyri of the supralateral, medial, and that of the inferior surface, please just pay attention to the fact that this sulci and gyri, they are not fairly constant in each and every cerebral hemisphere. They vary from one cerebral hemisphere to the others, and similarly on from one individual to that of the other individual. So I will tell you just only those sulci and gyri which are important and vary and shows the fairly constant position that you should note. Then otherwise, most of the sulci and gyri, they just shows a lot of variation and difficult to identify also in certain cases, difficult. So let us come first to the sulci and gyri on the supralateral surface. By this time you know this is the supralateral surface, this is the frontal pole is here, occipital pole is here, this is the temporal pole this is the temporal pole is here. So this is supralateral surface bounded above by the supromedial border and bounded below by the infralateral border and superciliary border or arch-like border. So this is the supralateral surface, and if we see the sulci and gyri, then the most important sulcus here is the central sulcus. Just I will pass my brush here in the central sulcus. See this? I am just passing my brush through the central sulcus, and this is usually constantly present in almost every cerebral hemisphere, in all the individual. This where I am just putting the tip of my thumb, this is the central sulcus which cut the supromedial border, as well as it goes right up to another sulcus which is called as the dorsal or posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. This is the stem of the lateral sulcus here, and then this is the dorsal ramus of the lateral sulcus. So it goes right up to this sulcus up to the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. Now this is the stem of the lateral sulcus, which you can see is placed above that of the temporal pole. It is just placed above this temporal pole, right? Now this is the central sulcus, and if you see the central sulcus, it is, as I said, it is quite deep. You can put your finger deep inside those. This is central sulcus. Then in front of the central sulcus there is a gyrus. See this gyrus where I am just putting the the brush. This is the gyrus which is present in front of the central sulcus, means towards the frontal pole or towards the frontal lobe. This gyrus is called as the precentral gyrus, naturally, because it is in front of the central sulcus, so it will be called as the precentral gyrus. And then there is a gyrus which is present exactly in similar way behind this central sulcus or posterior to this central sulcus, more towards the occipital pole, or occipital lobe here, and this is called as the postcentral gyrus. So there is a central sulcus in front of which is the precentral gyrus, and behind is the postcentral gyrus. It is the postcentral gyrus. Now this central sulcus, as in the last video I said that it is the posterior boundary of the frontal lobe. That means in front of the central sulcus, the whole area is the frontal lobe. So let us come to see the sulci and gyri of the frontal lobe on this supralateral surface. Okay, as I said, there may be lot of variation. There are usually two sulci. Okay, this is one sulcus here. See this sulcus going horizontally here, running parallel to the supromedial border here, through the longitudinal fissure is here. See this, and this sulcus is uppermost sulcus running parallel to this fissure. This is called as the superior frontal sulcus because it is in frontal lobe, hence called as superior frontal sulcus. And then there is another sulcus here which is close to that of the stem of the lateral sulcus here, and this sulcus is called as the inferior frontal sulcus. Okay, so there are two sulci, superior frontal sulcus and inferior frontal sulcus, and in between superior and inferior frontal sulcus the gyrus are folded. They are folded, they are not showing a very clear cut sulcus, okay, which is running anteroposteriorly. So thus these two sulci will have the three gyri. They will have the three gyri. Above the superior frontal sulcus, it is the superior frontal gyrus. See this? This is superior frontal gyrus. And below the inferior frontal sulcus, there will be the inferior frontal gyrus. See this? This is the inferior. And this large area which is folded in itself is the middle frontal gyrus. It is the middle frontal gyrus. So in frontal lobe on supralateral surface, there is a superior frontal sulcus, and then there is an inferior frontal, and the gyri here placed above the or superior to the superior frontal gyrus is as a sulcus is the superior frontal gyrus. This is the middle frontal gyrus, and this is the inferior frontal gyrus. Okay. Now, I have told you that this is the stem of the lateral sulcus, and from the stem of the lateral sulcus, three rami or branches will go from the stem. This is the posterior ramus, which is quite long, okay, going towards the occipital lobe. Then there is a rami of the stem of lateral sulcus is this, where I am putting my bristle of the brush. This sulcus, okay. And then there is another sulcus here. This is the horizontal. So this one sulcus, which is from stem of the lateral sulcus, it is going upward. That is called as the ascending rami of the lateral sulcus. Lateral sulcus, ascending rami. And one which is going anteriorly and horizontally placed, this is called as the horizontal ramus. Okay, so there is an ascending and then there is a horizontal ramus of the lateral sulci, right? So and this will be here the ascending rami, okay, of the lateral sulcus will enclose an area here that is called as the pars orbicularis, pars orbicularis, and this will be enclose a triangular between ascending and the anterior or horizontal ramus. This area, okay, let me show you here. This is the ascending and this is the horizontal. This area is called as pars triangularis. So there is an ascending part, ascending ramus, and then there is a horizontal part of this ramus, okay, and they are called as the pars orbicularis and the pars triangularis, okay, pars orbicularis and the pars triangularis, okay. Now, after seeing these areas, let us come to the, this completes, I think, the sulcus and gyri on the supralateral surface of the frontal lobe, okay. Let us come on to the parietal lobe, okay, sulcus and gyri of the parietal lobe. If we see the sulcus and gyri of the parietal lobe on the supralateral surface, there is an indistinguished where you cannot very exactly make out, right? There is a horizontal sulcus. This was the post-central gyrus, and this was the central sulcus, post-central gyrus, okay, and this was the post-central sulcus. Behind this, the first sulcus is here, running parallel to central sulcus is the post-central sulcus is here in the parietal lobe itself. Similarly, in the frontal lobe, this is the prefrontal, I would say precentral sulcus. Okay, it is the precentral sulcus. So here is the central sulcus, then precentral gyrus and precentral sulcus, and then here behind the central sulcus is the postcentral gyrus and the postcentral sulcus. Postcentral sulcus is here. And in the parietal lobe, I was showing you a horizontal sulcus. Okay, this is a sulcus running anteroposteriorly. See this where I am putting my finger trying to separate it out. And what was the limit of the parietal lobe from that of the occipital lobe? It was a imaginary line. The first imaginary line from the parieto-occipital sulcus cutting to the superior supromedial border up to the pre-occipital notch. This was the first imaginary line, and behind this was the occipital lobe. So in front of the first imaginary and second imaginary line was an extension of the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus, which was cutting to the or touching to that of the first imaginary line. So this area is the parietal lobe, okay, where we have seen postcentral gyrus, postcentral sulcus, and I am trying to show you this horizontal sulcus here. See this? Okay, and this horizontal sulcus is called as intraparietal sulcus. This is called as intraparietal sulcus, which will divide the gyri, okay, anteroposteriorly running this gyri into two different part or lobule. This is the superior parietal lobule, which is above the intraparietal sulcus. Okay, so this is the supraparietal lobule, and below this is the infraparietal lobule. Okay, it is the inferior or infraparietal lobule. So supraparietal lobule, and this part is the infraparietal lobule. Now let us come to the supralateral surface of the occipital lobe. And in the occipital lobe, okay, there is one prominent sulcus which will be seen here. It is the calcarine sulcus. Okay, let me show you here. I mean to say upturned part of the calcarine. Let us start seeing it from medial surface. This was the parieto-occipital sulcus, and then this was the calcarine sulcus, okay, on medial surface, okay. And if you see this, it will be cutting to the occipital pole and then going on for some distance on to the supralateral surface. So this is that calcarine sulcus which is coming right up to that of the supralateral sulcus, okay. So this is that upturned part of the calcarine sulcus which is seen here, okay, in the occipital surface. Let me show you here like this. Yes, this is that sulcus or calcarine sulcus. So only calcarine sulcus is important here onto the supralateral surface of the occipital lobe. There should be a crescentric sulcus here, which is called as the lunate sulcus. I think it is here. Yes, let us see here. It is lunate shaped, okay, crescentric shape. This is the called as the lunate sulcus. Not very important, okay, not very important. Let us come to the supralateral surface of this temporal lobe. This was the temporal pole, okay, and this is bounded below by the, posteriorly by the first imaginary line extending between parieto-occipital sulcus to that of the pre-occipital notch and the posterior ramus of lateral sulcus, and extending imaginary line number 2. Below that is this temporal lobe. There are two sulci, okay, running anteroposteriorly. There is a sulcus here, this very well seen. This is the superior, this is called as superior temporal sulcus. And below that there is another sulcus here, not that well seen here, but I am putting my finger in this, and this is the inferior temporal sulcus. So superior temporal sulcus, and this one is inferior temporal sulcus. This will divide the temporal surface, okay, temporal lobe on supralateral surface into 3 gyri: superior, middle and inferior temporal gyrus. Superior, middle and inferior temporal. So there are 2 sulci and 3 gyri on the supralateral surface of the temporal lobe. Okay, supralateral surface of the temp. This completes the supralateral surface, showing you the major sulci and gyri. Okay, now let us go to the medial surface, and for this medial surface I will use this cross section. Okay, you can see this cross section here, and this is the frontal pole, this is the occipital pole is here. Let me show you the major sulci and gyri. Okay, this is the corpus callosum, through which the right and left lobe are attached to each other. Okay, and just above this corpus callosum there is a sulcus here where my brush is moving. See this sulcus? And this sulcus is called as callosal sulcus because it is above the corpus callosum, hence it is called as the callosal sulcus. Okay, then above the callosal sulcus, okay, there is one more sulcus on this medial surface. You can see this sulcus here going here. See this? And then it will take an upturned part here. Okay, this is an sulcus which is called as the cingulate sulcus. This will be called as cingulate sulcus from here to here. Okay, this is the cingulate sulcus. Now between callosal sulcus and cingulate sulcus, this is a gyrus. This is a gyrus, gray matter area. Okay, and this is called as cingulate gyrus. So sulcus is called as cingulate sulcus, and below that is the gyrus. It is called as the cingulate gyrus. Okay, cingulate gyrus. And above the cingulate gyrus, whatsoever gray matter is here, it is called as medial frontal gyrus. Medial frontal gyrus. And this medial frontal gyrus, I will tell you, it should be here right up to the central sulcus where it is cutting here the supromedial border. Okay, supromedial border is cut. So this is the central lobule. Okay, this is called as the paracentral because central sulcus is cutting it here. So this part and this part is the paracentral lobule. Okay, and in front of the central sulcus and behind the central or posterior to the central, the whole this area is called as paracentral lobule. Cutting in between is the upturned part of the central sulcus. Now this is the sulcus which was called as this cingulate sulcus, which will upturn here, and that means okay, there will be a sulcus from the cingulate sulcus goes upward, and this is called as the paracentral sulcus, paracerebral. Okay, paracerebral sulcus. And this whole area behind is the paracentral lobule, where is the upturned part of the central sulcus is here. So a part behind this paracentral lobule, see this was paracentral lobule, okay, on either side of the central sulcus. Here there will be an area here which is in front of the parieto-occipital sulcus. This is very well seen. The parieto-occipital sulcus is very well seen, and this area between the parieto-occipital sulcus and that of the paracentral lobule, this area it is called as precuneus. Okay, it is called as precuneus. And a sulcus here, indistinguished sulcus, is called as the callosal sulcus. Now why it is called as? Because this is the part of the corpus callosum. Okay, corpus callosum. Which part of the corpus callosum? Is splenium. Hence this sulcus which is here above the splenium of corpus callosum is the suprasplenial sulcus. Suprasplenial sulcus, right? Then if you see the important sulcus is the parieto-occipital sulcus. Okay, and the parieto-occipital sulcus is here is the part of the occipital lobe where it is crossed by a horizontal sulcus, to which we have seen it is called as important calcarine sulcus. So this is the calcarine sulcus, right? Going from the parieto-occipital sulcus towards the occipital pole is the calcarine sulcus, and a part above this is called as cuneus. This was precuneus here in front of the parieto-occipital sulcus, precuneus, and above the calcarine sulcus, this part of the occipital lobe is called as the cuneus. And below this sulcus here, that means below the calcarine sulcus, this part is called as lingual gyrus. This is called as lingual gyrus. Okay, so these are the sulci and gyri onto the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay, just you have to remember that you will not be able to learn them, okay, very easily. You will have to draw the diagram on your notebook and then just draw these sulci and gyri and label them. Okay, after few attempts you will be able to master these sulci and gyri. Let us come now to the sulci and gyri onto the inferior surface. Okay, onto the inferior surface. Let me see it if I can see a better in this. Yes, this is the inferior or orbital surface. This is the inferior orbital surface. Okay, so on the inferior orbital surface we will learn first, and then we will go to the here it is the occipitofrontal surface, I mean to say tentorial surface here, okay, which is between occipital and the temporal pole. Okay, this is the tentorial. So inferior surface, yesterday we have divided into two. This was orbital part of the inferior surface, and this is the tentorial part of the inferior, because it is in relation with the fox, I mean say tentorium cerebelli, a fold separating the cerebellum from that of the cerebrum. Okay, so let us see the orbital surface, and it has a groove here. See this? This is the longitudinal fissure, midline is here, and on either side in right and left lobe of cerebral hemisphere you are seeing this gyrus. Okay, you are seeing this gyrus. Okay, and this is placed medial to the sulcus, and this is called as the olfactory sulcus. Why it is called olfactory sulcus? Because this is the first cranial nerve, olfactory bulb and then olfactory tract. It lies in this olfactory sulcus. Okay, and this gyrus here is called as gyrus rectus. Okay, so this is the olfactory bulb and olfactory tract lying onto the olfactory sulcus, right? Then just lateral to this olfactory sulcus, this is the orbital part of the inferior surface, which will show you the H-shaped fissure, which is not seen here. As I said, there are a lot of variations are available. A little S-shape. This is one standing limb of the H, this is another, and this is the horizontal limb. So there are, these are the gyri, orbital gyri. This will be called as the orbital sulci, and this will be the orbital surface. Various parts of the anterior, posterior, medial and lateral. Okay, this will be the orbital gyri, and this S-shape is the orbital sulci. Okay, so let us come to the gyri and sulci on the tentorial surface. Little broken here. but then we can see, okay, let us see, because here cerebellum is attached, so I cannot just pull it much, otherwise it will break. So I will use this only, okay, use this surface, inferior surface, tentorial part of the inferior surface. Here you will see there will be the two sulci, okay. One is more placed medially, this part. See this, where this part here, this is this one sulcus more posteriorly, I mean say medially placed. This is one sulcus here going anteroposteriorly from the occipital, I mean temporal pole towards the occipital pole, and this sulci is called as the collateral sulcus. This is called as collateral sulcus. And the gyrus which is medial to this collateral sulcus here, this gyrus is called as the para-hippocampal gyrus. This gyrus is para, and here it is broken, but here it is the uncus part is there. Then there is another sulcus which is not very well seen here in its anterior part, but it is here in posterior part, this sulcus, okay, and this sulcus was there, okay, and this sulcus is then called as the occipitotemporal sulcus, from occipital to temporal. So it is called as occipitotemporal sulcus. This was called as collateral sulcus, and this is the occipitotemporal sulcus, right? Collateral sulcus and occipitotemporal sulcus is here. So there will be between these two sulci, there will be three gyri, okay. To the medialmost, we have already said that this is the parahippocampal gyrus, and in between these two sulci, it is the medial occipital temporal gyrus, medial occipitotemporal gyrus, and this is the lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. So we have divided the inferior surface into two orbital surface. S-sep suture was there, orbital suture, and there was an sulcus here, olfactory sulcus was also there, and this was the tentorial surface of part of the inferior cerebral surface, okay, and there were two sulci and three gyri, okay. You have to draw the diagrams in rough notebooks and then draw the gyri and sulci and label them. This completes the gyri and sulci of the cerebral hemisphere on all of its three surfaces, that means suprolateral surface, then medial surface, and that of the inferior. And you should remember that this sulci and gyri shows lot of variation, so a book picture will never you get, okay, you will never get the book picture. Just very quick revision, okay, of this sulci and gyri with the help of this diagram, which I will show you from the same book here, Neuroanatomy for Medical Students, written by me, and this is from Walters and Kluwer. I am thankful to the Walters and Kluwer. See the sulci, a very quick revision of this sulci and gyri on to the suprolateral surface. This is the frontal pole, this is occipital, and this is temporal, okay. And what you see here, this is the supromedial border, infrolateral border. This is the posterior ramus of lateral sulcus. Now see this important sulcus. This is the central sulcus, which will divide frontal lobe anterior to it and a part of the parietal lobe posterior to this central sulcus. Now there are two gyri adjacent to the central sulcus. It is the precentral gyrus, and here is the postcentral gyrus, and precentral gyrus is then bounded by another sulcus here running parallel to the central sulcus, and this is called as the precentral sulcus. Similarly, a gyrus is bounding to the postcentral sulcus posteriorly, which is also running parallel to the central sulcus, and this is called as the postcentral sulcus. In the frontal lobe, there are two sulci, superior frontal sulcus and an inferior frontal sulcus, which will divide the frontal lobe into three gyri, okay. This is the superior, and this is the middle, and this is the inferior frontal gyri. Now this is the stem of the lateral sulcus, which sends the posterior ramus, an ascending ramus, and a horizontal ramus or anterior ramus. So ascending, anterior and posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus are here. Now what you will see here, you will see that in the inferior frontal gyrus, where the ascending and the anterior ramus of the lateral sulcus are seen, this part of the inferior frontal gyrus is called as the pars opercularis, and between the anterior and ascending ramus, this part is called as the pars triangularis. So it is opercularis and pars triangularis. Okay, we will learn the importance of this part in the next video. Okay, now the temporal lobe, here there are two sulci, superior temporal sulcus and an inferior temporal sulcus, and it is divided into three gyri: superior, middle and inferior temporal gyri. Similarly, on the parietal lobe, there is a horizontal sulcus here, which is called as intraparietal sulcus, and there is a gyri above this intraparietal sulcus is called as superior parietal lobule, and similarly there is an inferior parietal lobule. Now a imaginary line between parieto-occipital sulcus at supromedial border to the pre-occipital notch at infralateral border. If you draw a line, this small part is the occipital lobe, which will show here near the apex of occipital pole, the part of the calcarine sulcus which is mainly present onto the medial surface coming onto the supralateral surface. There may be a presence of a concentric lunate shaped surface. Okay, so these are the major sulci and gyri into the supralateral part. Okay, supralateral surface. Okay, supralateral surface. Let us go to the other two surfaces. This is the medial surface, and above the corpus callosum, this is the callosal sulcus, and above that this long gyrus is the cingulate gyrus, and above the cingulate gyrus this is the cingulate sulcus. And important on this medial surface, close to that of the supromedial border, is that this is the upturned part of the central sulcus coming on medial surface, and that means this is the precentral gyrus, and this is the upturned part of the postcentral gyrus, and then collectively this is called as the paracentral lobule. Okay, then above this, the cingulate gyrus, it is the medial frontal gyrus. Then here it is precuneus above the suprasplenial sulcus, because this is the splenium of the corpus callosum. So sulcus is suprasplenial sulcus, which divide here with the parieto-occipital sulcus into precuneus and cuneus. That cuneus is present onto the occipital lobe, medial surface. Then there is a gyrus going here, sulcus going here, and this separates the lingual gyrus from the cuneus. Okay, and this gyrus, this sulcus is very important, and it is the calcarine sulcus. Let us see quickly this onto the inferior surface. This was the olfactory sulcus, where the olfactory bulb and olfactory tract was first cranial nerve rest. This is the S-sept, orbital sulcus is S-sept, and divides into the four different gyri here on the orbital surface. The remaining tentorial surface part of the inferior surface will show the two gyri. This is the collateral sulcus, two sulci. This is the collateral sulcus, and this is occipitotemporal sulcus. Thus, we'll have three gyri: parahippocampal most medially, the middle occipitotemporal, and the lateral occipitotemporal gyri. So these are the different sulci and gyri on three different surfaces of the cerebral hemisphere. Thank you very much for watching this video.